Wow, you're all a very attractive bunch. So I know Mother's Day was last weekend, but I want to give it up for all the moms out there, anyone who's ever served that role. Let's give it up for the moms. To the parents, to those who served as parental figures, significant others, for all your sacrifices. Today's the day you celebrate your soon-to-be alumnus of the USC Rossier School of Education. I've been practicing that 500 times in front of the mirror, and I think I got it right. Rossier. 2 syllables. Speaking of celebrating, I can't think of a better way to celebrate all of our accomplishments than to take a huge selfie. So are you going to indulge me in taking a huge selfie? Okay, great. So let's just practice this really quickly. I'm going to count to 3, and we're going to put our fight-ons on and say Rossier. So put your fight-ons on. And when I say, on the count of 3, Rossier. 1, 2, 3. Rossier. Yes. Okay, let me set up the camera. I bought this stick for today. All right. All right. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. By the way, did anyone have any difficulties putting this thing on? Like it didn't come with instructions. Okay. Whew. Okay, so I was asked to share my transformational experience at Rossier with y'all today, but I want to first set up the context as to why I stand before you. 7 years ago, at the very beginning of my educational trajectory, I received some of the most heartbreaking words you can ever utter to a student. You're not cut out to be in college. And so the most obvious reason for the piece of advice is that this counselor was obviously not a graduate of the Rossier School of Education. The fact of the matter is that he based his perceptions of me on what limited knowledge he had, and presumably has, of the world. What he saw before him was another statistic in a disproportionate number of young men of color in the higher education context. And that the surest path for me was either unemployment or incarceration. Despite, or maybe because of, this discouraging advice, I worked hard, like many of you. I wanted to prove to this counselor that I was cut out to be in college. Well, I guess I've exceeded the counselor's expectations because now I stand before you today as your student commencement speaker and soon to be graduate of the USC Rossier School of Education. But I would have not achieved these accolades had it not been for the faculty who taught me to think critically, my peers who shared the same passion as me, and my mentors who believed in me. Ironically, the counselor's advice is what brought me to the Rossier School of Education. Like many of you sitting before me, I came to Rossier with a plethora of questions. For me, these questions included, why is it that so few Black, Latino, and Native American students persist through our educational systems? Or why does the education system why doesn't it promote upward social mobility for these students of color? If we promote the notion that education is a way out of poverty, why does literature illustrate something completely different? I have to admit that at one point, I began to doubt that education was a ticket out of poverty. But it wasn't until last spring when I took Politics of Difference with Dr. John Brooks Slaughter. And Dr. Slaughter, after reviewing a paper, asked me, or told me, you know what, Julio? You're well versed in the obstacles that so many of our urban students face, but what do you recommend should be done? I thought about that for a while. I looked back at the assignments that I had completed, so many of them framed from a deficit perspective. Essentially, I was promoting the same cycle that oppresses so many of our students, the same limited knowledge that my college counselor possessed. So I took Dr. Slaughter's question as an opportunity to reframe my academic voice. And that was my transformational experience at Rossier. I realized that in order to create equal outcomes for our urban communities, we have to create and support a new narrative, one grounded in an anti-deficit perspective. Through this counter-narrative, we promote stories that define students by their best, not their worst. Each one of us has had a transformative experience at Rossier, unique and inspiring. One thing is for certain, the Rossier School of Education has challenged you. Maybe made you feel emotions of doubt or frustration, and at the same time picked you up and made you stronger, made you persist. And this can be translated into our professional work. Our students, the learners that we will work with, they need to be constantly challenged, but we have to support supportive environments. Remember, students don't look for someone to feel sorry for them. They look for someone to believe in them. My transformational experience is rooted in the guiding principle that every student has value. Every student should have the opportunity to succeed. As we celebrate our accomplishments today, let us not forget to celebrate the accomplishments of our future students and learners. And remember to create and support the counter-narratives, ones that celebrate the best. It's our time to live up to the vision of the USC Rossier School of Education, a world where all students, no matter their circumstances, can learn and succeed. Congratulations, class of 2015.